We are now moving from Peru up to a very American topic, and to a topic that's very near and dear to our pubescent selves, sexual education. This will be presented by Colin Adamo. I have lived with Colin for going on 3 years now, and he was one of the lucky few Pierson freshmen who actually had a single in LW, and that unique characteristic of him has progressed throughout the years at Yale. Colin has been, to say the least, everywhere around Yale campus. I'll give you a truncated list. This year he is going to be the head coordinator of the now nationally famous Sex Week at Yale. Last year he was on the executive committee of Community Health Educators, one of the largest organizations at Yale. The information that he is going to present to you this evening under the title of Young Men's Education, or Young Men's Reaction to Sexual Education, is now in the process of being condensed and expanded in book form, in which Colin is going to attempt to use some of the information he studied this year and in his years at Yale to write a guidebook for young adolescents, male adolescents, for dating and relationships, geared toward middle and high school students. So I am pleased to introduce our second speaker for the evening, in a topic that is very much connected with the first, in young men's reaction to sexual education. Thanks.
Thanks again, Chris. So, my research is basically geared at what's out there for young men in terms of sex education and what they think about it. So we're going to start with a brief exercise. I want everyone to give me 5 seconds of your time. Close your eyes and think about where you learned everything you know about sex. Okay, so for lots of us...
Well, the thing is that I never learned with my eyes closed.
So for lots of us, the in begins with the sex education programs that occurred in many of our high schools. I remember in mine, there was a big push to learn sexual anatomy in word finds. So although it was really fun to yell out fallopian tubes and vas deferens when you found it among a jumble of letters, it wasn't really helpful to understand how these topics really would come about in our own experiences with sexuality in our lives. So in many ways, formalized efforts to sex education failed many young people in the US. They're often lacking lots of information. There's usually a specific focus on scare tactics to prevent the transmission of sexually transmitted infections. There's the joke in the popular film Mean Girls that sex ed in high school really just consists of your coach yelling at you, if you do touch each other, you will get chlamydia and die. And although this is a little bit hyperbolic, it's not entirely off. And many times if the information in sex ed programs goes beyond this, it still sticks in the realm of biological or anatomical. It really only considers the pipes you have, what's happening downstairs, rather than how to handle it or handle someone else's. And similar, even if your information in sex ed goes really comprehensive and starts talking about communication, general terms like this, communication, are hard to relate to your own life and often go in one ear and out the other, unless it really gets in depth on how to communicate with a partner, when, with what words. So what else is there outside of the classroom for students, for young people to learn about sex from? There's plenty of other guides or information on sex and relationships available to young people, but it really runs the whole gamut. Some of it often feels like a lot of it is more accessible to young girls. And even if it's not always perfect, like this month's issue of 17 magazine, which discusses how to get flirt texting, how to get your crush to heart you back. Even if it's not the perfect sex education information we want for our young girls, it still seems really accessible to them. It's a magazine geared towards and sold to and bought by teenage girls.
not be bad.
But sometimes it can actually be really fantastic. So this is the classic Our Bodies, Ourselves, a really comprehensive one-stop shop for everything related to sex, sexuality, sexual reproduction for young girls that really progressive parents might buy for their daughters. When it comes to boys, however, the materials they might find that are going to teach them about sex or relationship usually are above their heads. So this month's issue of Maxim magazine, a magazine not necessarily geared at young men, but many of us might remember flipping through it in the grocery store when our parents weren't looking to learn about sex. This month's sex column, so sex advice column, is discussing sexual vacations and spicing up your sex life by taking a really exotic vacation. And they recommend if you want to get the most out of your sex life, sometimes you have to pack it up, take it away, and bust it out in a totally new setting. Go south, or west, or east, or anywhere, young man, and you'll strike sexual gold. So I'm not exactly sure that information on romantic vacations in the Poconos or sexual getaways to the Bahamas are really going to be that helpful to any 16-year-old boys. But other resources, a popular one among young men today is the game, sort of.
That was the
To some it may be.
No, I look like it.
What it is, I don't know.
The game is sort of a relationship guide or sort of a dating guide for young men on how to pick up women and have relationships with them. But it winds up sort of just being a manual on magic tricks and techniques to innocuously belittle women into being attracted to you. It talks a lot about your own presentation, the presentation of your bachelor pad and your cool car, really things that, again, just go totally over the head of young audiences.
These look like very large books.
Yes. I mean, is that not really a question, but a statement.
I guess, are these not large books? How many pages is that? And why are they so big?
This one, about, yeah, a little over 400 pages.
This one? The monster?
I told you, any question you have, Master G, it's going to be answered in this one.
It's only for young ladies, though.
Only for young, exactly, that's the point. So yeah, the difference between these two sort of different bodies of literature is going to be that the ones geared towards young men just aren't geared towards younger audiences. So according to research, young men are not likely to be information seekers. But this sort of sets up a chicken or the egg conundrum. Like, are young guys not out there asking the questions about sex and sexuality because the resources don't exist, or there are no resources for them because they're not out there asking the question? But before we get caught up into this enigma, there's actually other theories of why these resources don't exist. So just looking back at normative values of masculinity, you may recognize that for young men, it's not really okay to ask these questions about sex or sexuality. So you sort of seem inadequate as a man if you don't know exactly how sex works or how to pleasure a partner or how to receive pleasure from a sexual interaction. And this sort of leads to a culture of silence where everyone just assumes that everyone else knows what's going on. Now, this isn't to say at all that young guys aren't out there talking about sex. Anyone who's been sort of young has either heard the locker room talk or the bragging in the weight room. But it does say that guys aren't out there asking the questions about their experiences or really how to have healthy sexual relationships. And this culture of silence is what makes it all the more challenging to reach young men. But the difficulty shouldn't preclude greater efforts to educate them. So previous research analyzing adolescent reactions to sex education efforts either focus on teens as a whole or just girls in particular. Usually because girls are thought to bear the brunt of poor sexual communication, especially with regard to unwanted pregnancy and sexual coercion. But this focus sets up a predator-protector paradigm in which boys are always thought to be in pursuit of girls and sexual encounters with them, and we always have to educate girls to evade their sexual advances. And this schema of sexual encounters really just isn't helpful for anyone. Simply put too, it just ignores half of the problem. So Center for Disease Control and Prevention about 2 years ago put out a study in which they found 1 out of every 4 girls between the age of 14 to 19 has a sexually transmitted infection. And one of the biggest reactions to this statistic was actually that this seems to almost blame the girls rather than considering the situation or circumstances that led to the contraction of their STIs.